Figure it's about time that I do one of these reflections about just my esports career, or I guess fucking the little bit that I do have. But this has been my second season within just covering esports or just being in the esports industry itself. And that's not even full flesh. This is also tracking a little bit beforehand too when I've been with an actual publication. Right, so it all started last year in the spring split. I started doing analytical notes. So what I would do is I would watch both NA and EU LCS, and I would take notes as I'm watching the game. And so there would be a lot of timestamps in which specific things happen within the game. And then I would create a summary of the game itself, and I would just talk about general thoughts about the game and how the game state went. And so I did this in preparation to well, first of all, it was to rectify my shitty memory, because my memory is just completely shot. It's probably because of all the fucking drinking that I've done. Cheers, by the way. So memory is completely shot, but I wanted to have these notes so that I could refer back to just as how the entire season went or whatever for a specific team. And maybe if I wanted to do an analytical article, I would have notes in order to back that up and to say, okay, these are specific moments in which this happened. So I started preparing all of that. And then during the summer split, at the very beginning of summer split, that's when I actually started writing articles. And so I did articles on Medium, and Medium's a great site, by the way, for anyone trying to be a beginner within esports. That's what I would recommend doing, is just go on Medium and do blogs. Just do analytical pieces, opinion pieces, whatever, about what you think, within the current scene of League of Legends, like a particular team. So that's what I did, because I knew I needed a portfolio to show these other websites, these other big websites that I'd wanted to get into at the time, like fucking Esports and Slingshot, and Rip Slingshot, it's a really good website, and then Yahoo Esports, Rip 2. But these were all sites in which I aspired to get into. And so I did my beginning articles. Some of them did decently well on Reddit, and I also had to learn about how to post on Reddit. I had to learn how to create a title, which I was shit at. I'm still shit at, but I had to learn how to do all these things, and so it's very overwhelming in the beginning, because there's so many different areas in which you need to learn. It's not only just about being good at writing, or it's not only about being good at analyzing the game, or it's not only good about knowing how to market yourself. It's a combination of all this different stuff. So it's very important to be able to understand all of that. And so that's where I started beginning to do that. And then so I got done with the analytical content within the summer split. So I started to look for, I guess, websites which would accept me. And so one of the websites which I found was Shot Caller, right? So I got my big break at the Shot Caller, and this was a startup website. It didn't have any money to pay me or anything, so it was just like purely volunteer and stuff. And so me and Darius were doing our thing. I was covering NA LCS, and he was covering EU LCS. And so he was like blowing up over there, which is great. Like, everyone memes that he's like the fucking EU Travis or whatever, which for ill or for not, that's that's kind of what I don't know if he wants to be that, but yeah, so he's kind of gained notoriety over there because that was very necessary. That was a niche that wasn't filled within EU, because you just really didn't have any media at all. Like no one was really trying over there to do content. And then I was doing written content over in NALCS, right? So I was starting to do written content, and I began to notice, you know, the difficulties of doing interviews and of doing, you know, just player style, player centric content. And this was when I started to be a little bit more self-reflective, right? Because when there's a question asked of just like, was journalism or was content creation all that you've expected? You know, was it everything you expected? It's like, actually, yeah, mostly. Like I knew it was going to be a grind, and it was going to be very difficult, but in terms of what I didn't know, it was that there is this huge amount of self-reflection. But I mean, aside from that, I don't actually consider myself a journalist, by the way. I consider myself a content creator, because with a journalist, there's this implication that you don't have bias, and I don't believe in that. I mean, modern journalism has gotten better nowadays to where modern journalists are now stating their opinions and stating their biases, which is good. It's a good thing to do, because once you know a person's bias, it's like, okay, they're looking at it through this scope, so I can measure it in this type of way, and then maybe I could get someone else's scope or someone else's bias on this same topic, and so I get two sides, two true sides of a topic, instead of just lying and saying that you aren't biased. Like, that's fucking bullshit, right? So I don't consider myself a journalist. Like, I don't do breaking news. I don't I'm not afraid to admit my biases. Like, I don't think NA teams are fucking good at all. I think their macro is shit. Like, I'm not afraid to criticize bad players. I'm not afraid to emphasize on good players. Like, I have my implicit biases, so never afraid to admit that at all. So that's why I don't consider myself a journalist itself. Like, I consider myself as a content creator, and someone who, once you view enough of my content or you read enough of my content, then you'll tend to understand my biases, and then through there you can judge me and my validity of my opinions in my scope. So that's what I hope to accomplish eventually, once I get more, you know, acclimated to the scene and everything. But as far as what I expected within journalism or in content creation, we'll just call it content creation, is that there is an insane amount of criticism. It's not public criticism. No. Like, I don't know. Maybe it is for some. Actually, luckily, maybe, I don't know, haven't had that much public criticism when I post interviews on Reddit or whatever, or I post videos, is that there hasn't been that much criticism itself. And I'm not sure if that's because I'm doing things correctly or if people just aren't noticing my errors, but that's my whole relationship with community criticism itself, is that I just haven't received a whole lot of it. So I'm not necessarily bitter from community criticism, or I'm not necessarily thankful for it because I don't get it a lot. Now, that means, though, even still, I think for any content creator at all, that they have to be self-reflective. Like, that is one of the most important things that I think that I've learned throughout my entire esports beginnings, is that it's not a fucking career right now. I'm not going to say it's a career because I'm not anywhere close to making a living off of this. But as far as my beginnings, being self-reflective, noticing your small tendencies or your bad habits, and actually editing your own work, you know, your own written work or your own opinion pieces or interviews or whatever, it's very telling. And you end up noticing specific things about your character or just your writing style or your interview style, and you end up picking on these things, and it's like this very nitpicky shit, and it ends up messing with your head probably far more than actual community criticism. Because with community criticism, you could say, oh, well, you guys don't know the nuance of, you know, this thing because you don't know insider knowledge and everything like that. But when it's yourself, it's like you kind of have no excuse. Everything's laid bare. And so it becomes very difficult. And so whenever I have to listen to my own video interviews, and I look through it and I look through the footage as I'm editing it, I'm just like, oh, well, I did this wrong. I wish I would have asked this question. Or within my written content, it's like, oh, I wish I would have formulated it this way. Or analysis piece, I wish I would have added this specific thing because that's a hole within my argument, right? And so this just goes back to just styles and how to develop your own style, because in the beginning my writing style comes from I guess maybe two writing styles, like, right? I think very proficient writers, they are able to have multiple different writing styles, but I've only really been kind of good at two. One, which is it's more is debate oriented, and so when I write a paper and I'm discussing a topic which I want to defend or I want to attack, I'm able to express that somewhat well, right? I'm able to go at it from several different angles and then to give my strong opinion about that. And so that's what I've done a lot in college and a lot in high school. And then my other style is fantasy. So I've read a ton of fantasy books, read a lot of Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms and stuff, and so I've been able to develop quite a robust vocabulary from fantasy novels themselves, but also I've learned the systematic approach of how fantasy is developed, and so I'm able to somewhat take from that and build this romance within, a particular writing style that I want to do when I'm trying to do that type of romance, even though I don't actually do a lot of emotionally driven content within the League of Legends scene anyways. Really the only thing that I do are my narrative pieces, but other than that, these are my two writing styles, and when looking at them, I'm able to pick them apart slowly and surely. Now, as far as when I went into Summer Split, right? So I worked for the Shot Caller, and then I ended up looking for another website because they wanted to do video, and I wanted to do video as well too, but they ended up going with Parks, and he's doing pretty good, but I wanted to do video as well. And they were just like, all right, we're gonna go with Parks. I'm like, all right, whatever. So I ended up figuring out about this website called Esports Heaven. Now, if Drexen watches this, you'll have to forgive me, because I didn't actually know who Drexen was, really. Like, I knew who he was kind of within the scene, that he was this veteran, but that's about it. And so I was like, I saw this posting for Esports Heaven, so like, yeah, well, I'm gonna show my portfolio, show the things that I've done with the Shot Caller and then I've done independently, and then I'll go from there. And then I got accepted, and that's when I realized the history that this website actually has. He's worked with like Frostgurn and Richard Lewis and Thorne and up and coming Jonathan Yee. So like all these different names in which I've heard of and that I know do good writing or do good work. These are names that I'm just like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Okay, I can learn from this legendary name. I'm actually in a great position now. So that's what I started working with in the Summer Split. And I started doing video interviews, which is entirely different from written interviews, because with written interviews, I was able to master my questions. I was able to master what type of questions that I wanted to ask and how to ask unique questions. And then for video interviews, though, there's the whole nuance all in between that. Is that how do you do follow-up questions? How do you interact with the camera and react to the statements in which they had said? So it was completely different spectrums in which I needed to operate and needed to learn about. And so now we go to Oakland, my first major event, because I didn't go to Miami because that was it just costed too much, right? I couldn't fly all the way to Miami. So I went to Oakland, and by the way, I drove all the way to Oakland, and I went on the coast, and the coast is super cool. It took like 12 hours, but it was a dope drive. Like I'm not into romantic scenery or anything, but it had a really nice scenery, not gonna lie. But I took my sports car up there, and there were a couple other sports cars. There was like a old school Mustang. There was like a Dodge Dart or something, like an old school Dodge Dart. And there was a Pontiac Grand Am. There was a Porsche Carrera. And we were all just racing up on the coastal line. It's like it, and it was crazy because I had never been there before, so I didn't know the turn after, you know, the turn that I'm seeing. And so it's like it says 15 miles per hour or something, so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take it at like 40 or 45. And so I'm just hauling ass, and I don't know what the next corner is gonna be. And of course I don't go too balls to the wall, because, you know, I don't want to fucking hurt anyone, and I don't go into the other lane or whatever the fuck. But it was very fun. Anyways, that's like an old hat that I used to have. But so get to Oakland, and my Airbnb is all fucked up. The Airbnb host isn't there, and it's like in the ghetto of Oakland. It was weird. Like I was sitting in my car waiting, and I see these dirt bikes riding down the road, and they're doing like wheelies and shit, and they have ski masks, and I'm like, what the fuck? So I'm like, all right, well, this is kind of sketch. And I have my fucking sports car, so I'm like, oh shit, like what the fuck? So so I end up canceling that Airbnb because the host took it was like 2 hours I waited outside the actual house. So I'm like, fuck this. So I go get a Holiday Inn for way more expensive, but I'm just like, fuck it, it's my first event, I don't care, I'm doing this no matter what. And then I get to the third place match. I don't get any interviews. I go to the final. I don't get any interviews. And that's the moment that I realized that there is an importance of connections when it comes to big events. And if you don't have those personal connections with players or with organizations, it's not going to work out. You aren't going to get a abundance of work because you just don't have the leverage. You don't have the credence to be able to do that. So I didn't end up getting any interviews at all. I had to do supplementary content, and that was I still learned some things from that, of like how I should do supplementary content for a big event, even if I don't get interviews. But this also ties into how much of an importance a social following is. And I never realized this. I think I joined Twitter back in early 2017, like spring split or something. And I noticed, first of all, that Twitter is great for learning about the stories of players and just their social interactions with other players or with other teams or whatever. And so it's very great to get just ideas about content on Twitter. I think that's the most useful thing about it. Twitter is not a space in which you have thought-provoking conversations. It's mostly just an entertainment platform. That's what it is fundamentally. There's only 280 characters. There's no room for nuance or context. So a lot of people get misunderstood when they talk on Twitter. So it's mostly just a idea generator, and then from there you can work from that. But the specifics of a social media following is important, because as the journalistic field develops now, we have begun to see power shift from websites to the actual journalists themselves, especially within esports. I think I don't know about any other journalistic field because I actually don't follow journalism at all. But within esports, you can see that when a journalist with a big brand moves to a different website, they're able to keep their audience, and that's very important. People like Thorne, people like Richard Lewis, Emily Rand, they're able to keep their audience no matter where they move to, and it's very important for that. So that is where the power of branding and the power of social media following is important. So that's what I noticed. And I made another question on here, a little prompt. I don't have many prompts on here, but who are the journalists which you look up to? And throughout my time of just studying all of this, right? Because I did game notes in the beginning, right? And when I was doing game notes, it was I was really into the game. It was like, all right, I'd been playing the game for a couple I started in season 1, and I was like platinum for like 4 seasons or something. Like I hard stuck like platinum 3, still hard stuck. And so I was never that great at the game, but I felt I had at least a fundamental understanding of the game. And so as that grew into the game notes, into analysis, I started to notice these other journalists. And some of the journalists that I look up to nowadays are, someone like Emily Rand. I notice things in which I can learn from her are she's very good at doing somewhat emotionally driven content, and that she will put her opinion within this particular feature, but it may have some player quotes in it, which is a very nice style. I'm probably going to try that next split. But she has this way of setting the scene of the actual piece or the actual feature. So she will set the setting, and it'll be like in the crowd, or it'll be her just sitting in the press booth or something, and then it'll go into the players and their play style and maybe a little bit of their history, and she'll just shift it, and it's a very nice progression. Like she does it very smoothly. So I've noticed this about her writing style, and she's probably one of the only ones that is actually able to do this. I've not really seen any other writers even attempt to do it that much. So it's very interesting for me to see this, and I notice this. And when you start to notice these different styles of these different journalists, that's when you can start to decide what you want to learn from them. So I go to Emily Rand for this emotional driven content, and like how to set up a setting, like that's what I go to, and that's what I study specifically from her, right? And then I go to someone like Richard Lewis, right? Now, I admittedly didn't read a lot of Richard Lewis's content back in the day, but I recently started reading his content, from that new website VP Esports, which, by the way, they're doing really good work. So I started reading up on his content and his articles. He has a way of, I guess, producing a opinion from the bowels of his veterancy, and it's very refreshing, because within the whole esports space, a lot of people are self-deprecating and they lack confidence. And from reading Richard Lewis's content, it's as though he's stating his opinion very boldly. And this is the type of writing style in which I have when it comes to my debate pieces that I wrote in college, is that I would state my opinion boldly, I would refute some common arguments, and I would just attack. And this is the style in which Richard Lewis has, and it's very invigorating and it's very refreshing, because he's one of the few that actually does this, because he has the balls to actually fucking do it within the esports industry. I really respect that. And just his way of crafting an entire narrative is really, really good. Like when I read his content, oftentimes I'm just like, whoa, I have so much to learn. I am so bad at writing. Holy shit. He's really good. He's really good. And then of course you got the homeboy Thorn. Now Thorn, if you already don't know from like my previous videos or anything, it's obvious that I take a lot of inspiration from Thorn himself, and that's only because his written content. First of all, let's discuss that. His written content is, I actually didn't read a whole lot of his written content. Even still, I haven't read a lot of his written content. Okay. But from what I have read, especially I remember most notably his Virtus Pro piece was very good about, you know, exiting the team and him kind of giving an ode to Virtus Pro as an organization and as a legendary lineup. And that was when I got one of the biggest tastes for his writing style. And obviously he goes with the whole historic approach, but not only that, he has this way of taking someone through the journey of the beginnings of whether it be a player's history or an organization's history, and he will spruce in his opinion on that as well too, and then just go through this timeline of fluidity. And it's clear that he's perfected that. It's clear that he's perfected fluidity and historical timeline along with emotion. He's actually a lot of his writings that I've read are very emotionally driven as well too. It's not very heavily analytical, and so when looking at his writing, it's something in which I can, I guess, look at and see, okay, how should a writing piece flow? He's really good at flow, and he's also good at just memorizing history itself, of course. So like that's just something that I need to work on. And he's also good at making I guess monumental moments. Like there are specific portions in the writing he'll just say legendary shit of just like, when you read that portion or when you read his ending, you're just like, whoa, okay, that was a really standout moment. Whoa, that was a really standout moment. And so he has these sprucings of just standout iconic quotes of his own writing, in which he's able to incorporate into that, and then that kind of ties the whole piece together. So it's really good, of course, but like I said, I haven't really read a lot of his writing, to be honest. And what I mostly look at is his video. That's what I mostly study, is his ability to do stream of consciousness. Like that's one of the best things about Thorn and his whole ability to speak, is that he's able to speak in such a continuous fashion that it makes him sound very confident in what he's saying, even though sometimes he may say something in which he's not analytically sound in, when it comes to like League of Legends or something. But it's the fact that he's able to continuously talk about that specific topic and also talk confidently about it and apply a good amount of logic as well too. That's his biggest strength, is his ability to produce and to express his logic within a video format or within a speaking environment. That is one of his best attributes, I think. And so I've just been noticing his speech patterns, and I've studied his speech patterns and how he's able to talk within the microphone and talk about his specific topic of whatever it may be, and just take notes from that, and take notes from his speech patterns and his hand gestures and things like that. So he's someone that I've studied pretty heavily. Now, as far as best interview that I've done, I think probably have to be, oh well, all right, I'll give a couple. Is one would be my interview with Acadian, and this was the written interview that I did with the shot caller. We ended up talking about the impacts of social media on a player, and also we talked about the meta of an interview and if he enjoys doing interviews, right? So the first portion, social media's impact on a player, that was a moment in which it felt like it wasn't an interview. It was just me and him talking, like just me and, you know, Acadian and Izento just talking in a fucking room, and that's it. And we're just chilling, right? And so this was the first interview in which I felt like it was just a regular conversation with a player. And so that was super memorable. And then it went to the portion of, yeah, if he's happy with doing interviews. And he ended up saying something like, you know, actually this is one of the first interviews, like I haven't done a lot of interviews to Split, which he hadn't, and he didn't want to do, like he did one with Travis, and I think that was about it. But he was like, anytime I do an interview, it seems like they just ask the same generic questions, you know, like, oh, how's the game, how's team morale, shit like that. And he's like, this is one of the few interviews in which I've done which the questions are unique. And I'm like, oh, okay, well that's dope, at least I'm doing something kind of right. So that was a moment in which I had noticed that I should keep going to the pattern in which I'm doing, which is thinking outside the box of just, okay, well, what are the questions in which someone else is going to ask? Okay, now I will ask things beyond that. And it seemed like, at least at that moment, that interviewers or beginner interviewers were asking very surface level questions. And then once they got and dug deep past the surface level and asked follow-up questions, then they would get the actual good answers. Well, sometimes players will just give a shitty answer for the surface level question because they're just like, well, that question's boring, like I don't really care. And so you never get into this deeper question. And so what I would always construct my questions as is things in which are going on within the community, because I watch or I read a lot of other interviews, and I watch a lot of other interviews, and I watch a lot of other content, and I'm on social media all the time, just reading Twitter posts or reading Reddit posts, even from fans. And so I'm just trying to absorb all this knowledge and all these topics, and then I'm able to address those topics within my interviews. And I think a lot of other interviewers or a lot of other journalists don't do that. They don't get enough outside content out of their own content, and so therefore they aren't able to address common questions or even nuanced questions in which these fans are asking, or these community experts would like to know. And I think that has been the difference in which my interviews have strived, is that since I consume so much other content, I'm able to know what questions have already been asked and then ask things past that. So yeah, that was Acadian. Good interview. I always enjoy doing interviews with Acadian because he just seems like a real ass motherfucker. So, and then my other favorite interview was Prawley and his coaching philosophy. I was just able to ask a lot of ideas of coaching, you know, like how to coach a superstar, how to coach a rookie player, how to keep the peace between players and things. And this interview actually didn't do that well on Reddit or anything, but I think the industry enjoyed that interview, and I think it sparked a conversation about coaching philosophy and how coaches operate within a team. I think I helped progress that conversation as the Split kind of approached its end, and Reaper started to get more buzz about how he was coaching, and Saint Vicious ended up getting more buzz about he was coaching, and things like that. So I think it's cool to see when you produce a piece of content that you had there's like this direct path in which you could see your influence affecting other people's content. Like it's really, really cool to see, and it's really rewarding to see that. And maybe that just might be me being very self-centered and shit, and like just over myself or whatever. But I really think that interview kind of had an influence on the conversation and the narrative within the entire like NALCS summer split. And then another interview that was good was Cody Sun. Particularly because this one also didn't do very well on Reddit, but it was a video interview that I did this summer split, and I had asked him a question about criticizing a veteran player and if a rookie is able to do that, and his response was pretty thought-provoking, because he had said, no, you should definitely not do that, and you don't have the social status to do that. And that just got me thinking of just the whole interactions between a rookie or a semi-rookie interacting with a veteran, like say his relationship with Afromu. I bet it's somewhat inhibited by that process, and so he can't actually give the full-on criticism that he wants to give, because well, Afromu is just way up on the hierarchy of them. So I thought that was interesting. And then another interview that was pretty good was well, I guess one that I had a little bit of fun with was Olay, when we did that rap at the end of my interview. That was pretty dope. I was like, oh shit. I didn't memorize the rap because I had written it like 2 minutes before he came into the interview room, and so I was like, fuck, well, I can't just do this off the top of my head because I'll probably say something ridiculous. So I was like, all right, I'll just read from the notebook. I felt like fucking Cannabis doing a fucking King of the Dot battle against Disaster, but it was fun. Yeah, those are my favorite interviews, I think. And as far as what I think I've improved on in terms of writing or video for this split, I think it's for writing not a whole lot, to be honest, because I guess the interview is the same. Like when I did interviewing with writing, like I said before, it wasn't about me asking follow-up questions or interacting as far as like a regular conversation. I would just focus on the question itself. And so when I did video interviews now, like I'm able to ask follow-up questions, I'm able to respond to their responses, so that's gotten better. And then as far as just me doing video content in general on like my YouTube for opinions and stuff, I think I've gotten quite a bit better as far as stream of consciousness and just giving my opinion as a free-flowing thought. I think it's been somewhat good. I've figured out a specific structure on how I want to formulate these types of videos and things like that. So I think those are small things that I've improved on. There's still a lot that I can improve on. And then I think one of the coolest things is improving with other journalists, other small journalists. It's cool to see all these guys in the LCS press room and kind of connecting with them and just going through the same struggle that they're going through at the same time. And sometimes you learn from their mistakes and you can say like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm glad you made that mistake. Like I'm not going to do that. But it's great to see other journalists grow alongside you and to have this type of camaraderie. And although it is still somewhat competition, it's a competition to more so keep up with the rest of them rather than to beat them, rather than to sabotage them, right? It's not about that necessarily. It's about keeping pace. You know, it's like when you're running in a marathon or something, or you're running on a track. It's about keeping pace with those other guys, because you don't want to be the last motherfucker back there, right? So you want to keep pace with everyone else, so it keeps on pushing you. It gives you motivation, and I think that's something that's very special within the time that I have right now, because a lot of the guys that are doing journalism right now within the NALCS, it feels like they're really invested in it, like just as invested as I am within it. And so I know that these guys aren't going to quit come 2 months or 3 months down the road. It seems as though they all are very invested. So that's something unique. Maybe a lot of other journalists, as they had been pursuing, they didn't have that experience, and so it was very hard to lean on someone else and to improve on, and just to have that motivation. So I think my current timeline is very fortunate in that regard, at least. And it also helps too that these other big journalists, they seem like they want to help. You know, it seems like they are looking out for new and rising talent. You know, Thorne did that video about how to do an interview. Like that was prime shit. You know, I studied that, and I was like, okay, this is what I need to learn about. And then, you know, Travis Gafford, he ended up making that video about how there are no other video interviewers within the space, and that one was really enlightening. And that one had kind of spurred, I know, a couple other journalists to do journalism itself too, and to penetrate the North American market. So it's very cool to see all this reaction of, first of all, these top journalists recognizing that there are other journalists below them that are working up and are putting in effort, putting in the work, and they are willing to give feedback about that. And then it's refreshing to just work alongside and work in the fucking trenches with all these other small journalists and just wail away at content. I think it's really cool. But yeah, it's been my 2 seasons, 2 years, almost 2 years. I guess it'll be 2 years in spring, but 2 seasons within League of Legends. And I hope for many more opportunities to create really good content, and I want to do even different ideas of content as I get more of a knowledge within this space, and maybe a little bit more clout within the space. But yeah, this has been my journey. It's been pretty cool so far, so pretty fucking happy with it, you know. Just doing my thing, and I don't know, we'll get it next year. I'm still going to be doing Worlds content anyways. I won't be at Worlds, but I will still be doing content surrounding Worlds, so look out for that. Otherwise, keep it real, keep it locked, and I will see you guys at the next piece. Peace.